nasibi maibuya Africa. Africa, maibuya.
Comrades, thank you. You know, I've got 20 minutes to say what is a very big story in relation to what unfolded at Marikana, which frankly had been building up over a number of years. And I'm going to try and do that within the time frame. So let me just kick into it. There's broadly two main areas I want to talk about. The first is what were the socio-political environment, what were the economic drivers that led to the events at Marikana, and the second is what it's a bit of a misnomer just to talk about Marikana. What is the drivers that led to mass action across the platinum, gold, iron ore, parts of coal, parts of diamond, the mining industry of South Africa? I think that's more appropriately positioning the issue. And secondly, what was going on in our institutions, in the companies, in the unions, in the collective bargaining relationships that have been put in post-1994 that led to the collapse of these institutions in the face of mass action. So,
sorry, Gavin, isn't it all possible to increase the size of the font? If that's a simple exercise, otherwise leave it.
It's not simple.
No, it's not simple.
You can move this back. Move this, I think.
Alan, you'll have to move.
Yeah.
No, you have to move it back.
Yeah, I'm just testing, you know.
No, that's fine. Backwards ever, forwards never.
So this is now how much this.
No, that helps.
If you want to see that, you have to move forward.
You know, I'm going to speak like a shop steward, so it's okay, bro. You'll hear it. The first thing to understand about migrant labor is a twin of resource extraction worldwide. Typically, resources are found in remote places that warrant a migrant labor system. However, in South Africa, as we all know, who've read and understood apartheid capitalism since we were born, is that the migrant labor system was imposed upon a capitalist system to cross-subsidize. So the idea for the bosses was simple. The working class will subsist and reproduce itself in the homeland poverty areas, and we will top it up with a bit of wages when they work on the mines. That was the unique feature of apartheid capitalism through, you know, since the land wars. However, this feature of migrancy in South Africa is unique in the world, and it's unique in two main ways. The first main way is that it's not a migrancy of an Australian worker who's sitting on the dole and who decides that he wants to go skiing in December on the slopes of sort of Switzerland, and decides to go for 6 weeks into the mining industry of Australia and Western Australia, make a lot of dollars and go ski, and then go back on the dole. Our migrants come out of poverty, unemployment, desperation. They are compelled to go up to the Rustenburg belt, and it's the structure of poverty and inequality which drives our migrants into the migrant labor system. Very different to guys going to work on an oil rig, guys going to work on the Australian mines in Western Australia. Secondly, the cycle of South African migrancy is a 12-month cycle. That's unique in the world. Typically, the cycles are 6 weeks, 2 months, maybe up to 3 months, make some dollars, get out of it. So we have this sustained cycle and a low-wage, poverty-driven cycle. Okay. If you want to understand this, I try and live with migrants, I try and live in their homes, I try and drink komuti with the guys and talk about their lives. They basically talk about 3 elements to their lives. The first element is home, my homestead, where I come from. In the case of South African migrants, the vast majority, in fact 100% of South African migrants, which constitute about 80% of the migrant pool in South Africa, come from Ponderland. Sikisiki, Flagstaff are the key labor sending areas for migrant labor. These people, that's where their homes are, that's where their homesteads are. And if in the old days, so-called old days of the 50s or 60s or 70s, we used to go into the hills of Ponderland and you'd always be able to see the migrants' homes because they were the ones that were painted. Because if you were unemployed and sitting in poverty, you couldn't even afford to paint your home in those beautiful bright blue colors. Today, if you go into the same Ponderland, you'll see that the migrants cannot paint their homes anymore. The best homes on the hills are the homes of public servants. And that is precisely because of the structural change that I'm going to talk about that's happened in the migrant labor system. So that's home. Home is where your heart is. Home is where your cattle are. Home is where your wife one, wife two are. Home is where there are a lot of children as well and hungry mouths to feed. But then the unique feature that's happened post-apartheid in South Africa is that in the mining industry, reacting to the ugly face of migrant labor, naked searchers, workers living in compounds in desperate conditions, the bosses, in reaction to a demand, in fact, from the NUM for decent accommodation, for decent housing, started to give workers two types of allowances. The one was a home ownership allowance, and that was essentially a bond subsidy for those that are living in and around the mining areas. And in order to create equity in the workforce, they also gave them they gave the migrants specifically what they call a living out allowance. And a living out allowance is typically somewhere between 1,800 and 2,500 rand a month. And in order to access that allowance, that cash, workers left the migrant hostels and they went onto the shack lands of the Platinum Belt and they built shacks. So if you go into the shack lands now, and if you drive up the road to Rustenburg and you go into those shack lands, you'll have to wear sunglasses. Because the shacks are not the shacks of an unemployed. They're the shacks of a mine worker. They are brand new, shiny zinc, which, jumps into your eyes. And once they get into the shacks, the very first thing is to create a home. So the first thing they got was Dinyachi 1, your first wife, and your Dinyachi 2, and maybe you could get a roll for King Dinyachi, and then you were kind of moving up the ranks. and if you got your Dinyachi, the first thing your Dinyachi wants appropriately is, I want a fridge, it's hot, and I want a stove, and I want a bed and a kitchen and everything that constitutes a home. So the migrants of the Platinum Belt took on a secondary family. It was a key change post-1994. Now that the dependency rate for migrancy has gone from 8 for one worker to 15. And they've had children. And increasingly I'm finding when I talk to Amabasebenzi is that they don't go home for annual leave. They stay on the Platinum Belt. Jobs are scarce. You must stay there and you must carry on working. Or even if you take a holiday, you stay there. In addition, they're waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. They maybe get a piece of bologna on a piece of bread and you get out there. And you take one taxi, sometimes 2 taxis, to get to the shaft at 6. At 6 o'clock, you go down in the cage, 1.5, 2 kilometers underground. You then walk for 3 kilometers. Then you get to the face. Now the face is 1.3 meters into the rock, high. And you have to pick up a 25 kilogram drill bit. And you have to try and drill that drill in 1.2 meters into the rock. That's a perfect blast, in Boss's terms. They're currently getting about 550 to 560. They are exhausted. They cannot do that job anymore. They're carrying 2 families, 2 very hungry families, one local, one where we come from. And they do the most dangerous and formidable work. Let's understand the demographics of the people that we're talking about. The people we're talking about, as I've said, they're largely from the Eastern Cape. 80% of the migrant population is from the Eastern Cape. The bulk of them, these are the founders of the NUM. These are the comrades that faced the bullets of Bok in order to save the NUM. when BOP was a homeland, and when the NUM was banned in BOP. Have respect for these comrades. These comrades are my age. They're the class, we call ourselves the class of 76. We had the honor and the privilege of being 18 years old in 1976. We were politicized by the youth of 76. They're typically between 55, 40, like 50 to 60 years old, and they are functionally illiterate and innumerate. They are the victims of apartheid who have seen no change in their life for 18 years. In fact, their lives have got worse, significantly worse. They are, interestingly, as I look and try to understand the demographic of the workers, is that they are joined by a third, roughly, 20 to 30% of young workers. Those workers are 25 to 35 years of age. They typically would fall in the category of economic freedom fighters. They're militant, they're angry. They've seen what's happened to their fathers and their grandfathers. They come from the same villages. Because the rock drill operators we're talking about, by the way, when they sit and drink kombucha on the hills of Flagstaff and Lusikisiki, they might come from Anglo Gold, Anglo Plats, Impala Plats, wherever, linemen, but they all are rock drill operators. And they all have been drilling rocks in this industry for 150 years. It is an Amapondo job. And nobody else, not even Amafengu. Because if you understand the demographic, or the sort of, what do you call this stuff, the divisions within the heterogeneous nature of the Xhosa people, you'll know that the Amafengu are on the borders of the Eastern Cape. They went to Mission Vale, they got a little bit educated at Fort Hare, and they became the leaders of the ANC. Every single one, bar one, leader of the ANC is an Amafengu. But the Amapondo, they were the people that Gavin Hartford wrote about in his book, The Pondo Revolt, in the 60s. They were the ones who resisted colonialism to the last drop of a man. And they still carry that tradition within them. They're joined by these young workers who do not carry the family responsibilities, who are more educated than their fathers are, and who are militant and angry. And that is the cocktail, the working class cocktail that is created, which drives the industrial action that we see. And if you want to go and see and look at that industrial action with eyes that can see, you'll see that amongst the workers is the old men that I'm talking about, and it's the youth in the front, and it's the women. And who are the women? They're the Dinyatsis. The Dinyatsis are from the community, are there because they're the first recipients of the pay packet. And the other day I phoned my people in Pondo land and I said to them, what's going on in the Pondo families? They said to me, you know, there's a new feature in the Pondo families. Because men are killing women. Husbands are killing wives. Why are they doing that? Because they know that up here on the Platinum Belt, there's another whole family. They're getting the money before them. The amount of remittances going back home is getting less and less. Man comes back, finds wife, moved on to another guy, murder in the family. So understand the connectivity between the rural poor and the mine worker. I'm going to try and say the story very quickly, but there's a trigger of everything. You know, the chain breaks as its weakest link. In the case of the implants, they went through a process. Last year, they concluded a collective agreement in October last year. They went off to a seminar in December. The bosses and the union leaders sat together and celebrated and drank together and declared themselves having the best industrial relations in the country. Meanwhile, what had actually happened was that they finished their wage negotiations in October. In November, the bosses implemented an 18% adjustment for a category of workers called miners, which are frontline supervisors in mining. The RDOs, the rock drill operators, had been demanding a differentiated increase for themselves. They saw that the NEM did not deliver on the differentiated increase, and they saw this adjustment to the miners, the very miners that they work with in teams on every single panel across Implats. They went home to Flagstaff, to Lesikisiki, and they made a plan. That when we come back in January, we're going to pull the shafts down. And on the 12th of January, they started on 14th shaft, which, by the way, is an NUM stronghold. There's 6,500 employees, so don't think this was an ambush strike. Don't think it wasn't any other strike, but workers organizing for their future. And they pulled 14th shaft down, and they pulled every shaft down on the north mine, on the south mine. And they came up, from underground saying two things. We don't want to negotiate with the NEM, because they had seen that the very people that were negotiating their increase were miners themselves, who were beneficiaries. The chairman of North Branch, the chairman of South Branch of the NEM, both of whom were miners, who were the ones who were the beneficiaries of the 18% adjustment. They had been told only weeks before that the bosses, Amaklashi had no money. You must settle on 10%. And then this happened. So it's not surprising that they were angry, that they were militant, and they pulled shaft by shaft down, and they started what ended up being a 6-week strike. When the strike committee was formed, the first thing I did was go and look at the strike committee. Who's in the strike committee? Strike committee, I'm a pawn to a man. There was one woman. 25 people, all I'm a pawn. They drove that strike. And it was the most disciplined strike. And some of the bosses told me, actually, that they'd been working in the company for 25 years, so they'd seen a lot of strikes. It was not the first strike they'd ever hit in Para. They said this was the most disciplined, organized strike, no violence, no nothing, just boom. It only started the violence when the company started to try and dismiss the people. That strike and the victories out of that strike, because there were big adjustments as a result, nobody talks about this these days, inspired the Lonman workers to do the same thing. It inspired the Anglo-Plat workers to do the same thing. And it's the same thing rolled out into the gold sector thereafter. The end result, total meltdown of collective bargaining. Total meltdown, the National Union of Mine Workers scarcely has a member. I mean, there's like 10% of companies that had used to have 80%. Implats, Lonman, Anglo-Plat, they exited the NUM. In fact, the biggest contingency is not with Uncle. It's guys who have resigned from the NUM but are unionless at this point. They have lost confidence in the labour movement to deliver anything on their behalf. The biggest majority union today is Uncle in Implats as well as in Lonman, and it's a matter of time before they take Anglo-Plat. So they took the whole platinum belt. I'm told that they're taking the whole gold belt as well. It's a fundamental structural change in the labour movement, and particularly in Kasati unions. In excess of 50 deaths, violence and intimidation, anger, distrust. The list is endless, guys, you know. We have to try and understand two things. What were the causes? I've talked a bit about those. Then why did the institutional failures? What was going on in the union? And what was going on in the company that led to a situation where ordinary workers who had been part of that union, part of that company, I mean, these workers have 35 years of service. They're not like kids. Walked off the job and took the future into their own hands. And that's what I want to talk to now. So, I happen to be an old school trade unionist. I happen to have spent 15 years on shop floors. I love it there. I love poor people. So I went in and I tried to understand what's going on in union structures. And the first thing I recognized is that at the top level, I don't have a pointer, but that at that top level, where collective bargaining is done, the top 5 in the union were all C-band. C-band's a Patterson band, what Jane referred to. It's basically, a C-band employee earns 3 times what an A-band employee earns. give you an idea. And they were effectively the first line of supervision in companies are miners and supervisors or shift bosses. They are C-band employees. They are NUM members. They're in a managerial function, and they're occupying the top 5 positions of the branches. Top 5 being, chairman of the branch, vice chairman, treasurer, secretary, etc. And they negotiate collective agreements. They're all full-time shop stewards. They no longer work at the bottom of a shaft, and they negotiate collective agreements, and they're basically cell phone guys with cars and bonds and boom, boom, boom. We'll come more to that. Even if you go down one level to mine level, you'll find that it's dominated by C-band people at mine level. If you go to shaft level, you'll see it's a mixture between C and B bands and A bands. It's a mixture when you get to the shaft level. But the bottom line is that A-level employees at all levels through the union, which are the vast majority, have no representation in the decision-making structures at branch level within the union. By the way, none of this is secret. I presented this to Kasatu. I'll be presenting again to the NUM directly in the CEC. I've given them all the information. You just don't get popular for speaking truth to power. But I'm too old to worry about that. In the union, on that structure is a batch of material benefits. I call it the emergence of a union aristocracy, where on the left-hand side there, the wage and grade adjustments, where they upgrade people, or they pay them allowances to be a full-time shop steward, are 3 times the bottom. They remove them from production, out of the shaft into offices, aircon, tea, computer, car, cell phone, whatever. They start to manipulate whether it's tenders, recruitment. And one company, who will stay nameless for the moment, had negotiated and agreed on a union list for employment. So you don't employ by yourself, you only employ from this list. Back at the office, Oaks who gets a job, you sort me out, I sort you out, no problem, brother. It's African style, we work things out here. Insured benefits, you see it, the gold strike started in golf fields, where the union had effectively put in an insured benefit on a funeral plan, and without even consulting their members, and had clearly no support, and the guys revolted against, I think it was a 65 rand deduction on their wages coming from the union. So that package of material benefits in an environment of poverty and inequality, where there are no empowerment trains available, and the last one that's at the station is called the union, becomes a highly contested space. Even at branch level, leading up to the National Union of Mine Workers Congress, there were all sorts of problems of getting the credentials right because people were manipulating to get those positions. Because those positions meant that, the key point here is around leadership accountability, is that if you get into that position and you toe the line of the region, and the region toes the line of the national, everything is about walking up the chain of leadership. It's not about service to the bottom, how it used to be. Used to be, you're a good shop steward if you were first in the battlefield, the last to leave, always servicing the members. Abasabezi, I love you. Now it's leadership, I love you. Collapse of constituency-based trade unionism. When you look at the actual constituencies in the union, in respect of who they're servicing, are they servicing? They're no longer serving their constituencies. As they're elected, they move away from production. Poor general meeting attendance, percentage increases, the point that Jane raised, percentage increases over the last 15 years have further divided the bottom from the top, stratified the bargaining unit increasingly. I'll jump there. Despite all the noise we hear, Despite 18 years of social dialogue, we are poorer, we are more unequal, there's higher unemployment, there's more and more protest action, community process, strike action, service delivery process. Ask myself, leadership has failed us. 18 years later, they're still talking in all sorts of forums, from NEDLAC to Millennium Labour Councils to President's Council and. But all we've got is more poverty, more unemployment, more inequality, more poor delivery of services to our communities. The bottom line is that despite all the talk, is that there is no declining levels of worker control and democracy. Everything is about getting on the bandwagon, emulating your leaders. If you're a leader, you have cars, phones, house, BE transactions, you name it. You're an insider. But for those of us who are not an insider, it's a picture of poverty and unemployment growing every day. No control over shop stewards, or lower levels of control. Let's say no control, but lower levels of control at shop floor level, low union accountability in general meetings. Management, singular reliance on this new aristocracy, and effectively, off record saying, sort the guys out and you'll also be sorted out. That's the new emerging collective bargaining relationship. What's very interesting is that that's the union. Look at the companies. They're equally complicit. This is not a union bashing session. The companies are equally complicit in this destruction. What's happening in the companies post-1994, the NEDLAC Act was the first act of the Democratic Parliament. Following that was the Labour Relations Act negotiated in NEDLAC. A raft of labour law, Basic Conditions of Employment Act, Employment Equity Act, Skills Development and Act. Increasingly, the relationship between the frontline manager and the worker has broken down. It's become a professional thing to handle labour issues. So you're finding companies that their HR departments have ballooned. They're full of specialists who handle labour issues. If you go to a frontline manager and ask them, do you know the names of your workers? Do you know whether they've got children? Do you know whether they're married? Do you know where they come from? They maybe know where they come from, and that's it. They don't even know their own people. There's a total collapse at shop floor level between the frontline manager and the employee. Everything is resolved by IR. IR runs in firefighting across shaft by shaft by shaft, because frontline management never talks to its people. Frontline management is there for two things: production and safety. We don't deal with labour issues. How do you get to production? How do you get to safety? Through people. Everything is done through people. But they have disowned people. Now the companies rely on the labour aristocracy to manage the people, and the technical guys are your production guys, and your production guys deal with production and safety. So, low levels of end result, low stakeholder management, low people problem resolution or frontline management. They don't resolve people problems at all. Heavy reliance on HR to do employee relations jobs, and heavy reliance on collective process. And the union, interestingly, has taken on the function of doing management's jobs. Shop stewards are confused today if you ask them what your job is, because sometimes they'll keep telling you things which are typically a management job. They're not representing the members appropriately, and they're taking on functions of management at the bottom line. It's no wonder that workers, when they stand up, they say it's foot tack to the union and foot tack to management. Okay, I'm just going to jump through that. I'm told I've got 1 minute or 2 minutes. It's a long story. There's a lot of ways to solve social problems. You can have a socialist revolution. You can have a social democratic process. I don't know. You comrades are better to work that out. So I thought I'll just talk to you about what needs to happen in the labour front, in the union front. We have to go back to basics. We have to go back to a culture where we love our members, where we listen to them, and where we service them. That's the fundamental point. No to nepotism, yes to altruism. We must have rebuild a culture of service and love for our members. Defend the basics, unity and solidarity versus individual opportunity. Increasingly, if you're in a leadership position, you're on the train to maybe make something for yourself. That's not a labor movement culture. We have to go back to build solidarity, build unity, serve your members. Living wage solidarity is key. You guys are discussing it all the way. I've been saying this for years, but let's go back to rands and cents. Funa ponti, 2 bucks. That was the call in the 80s. Just $2 an hour. That's what we're looking for. It's not surprising that the farm workers, the mine workers, they don't come up and say, "Oh, what was inflation?" If inflation was 6%, well, I'll have a 1% adjustment above inflation. I mean, where do we get this shit from? You know, they just say, we want 70, we're on 70, we want to go to 150. We're on 6,000, we want to go to 12,500 if you're a mine worker. Finish and plow. I mean, I don't think there's any science to wage bargaining. It's about simply what do we need and how do we get it. And we deal with the consequences of it afterwards. Rebuild general meetings, branches, locals, regions. I mean, the general meeting is the parliament of the workers. And the general meeting is dying. If you go and look at general meetings, you will see in plants of 24,000 members, you know, there's 1,000 in a general meeting. In a wage negotiation. Not in sort of an election process. In a wage negotiation. So you can see by the basic elements of trade unionism that those structures are collapsing on the ground. Rebuild worker democracy and control. The shop floor constituency is the heart of that. The general meeting and reporting and accounting to members is the heart of that. And then lastly, the union election process. I mean, this notion, at branch level we have slates. You won't believe it. We have slates emerging at branch level. A local branch of a mine. Go for this slate versus that slate. And obviously there's politics also. Is that the slate which is going to bat for Zuma? Is that the slate that's going to bat for somebody else? You know, that's a culture which is emerging inside the units. And deepen democracy at every single level in the election process. You know, people ask, does this mean we can't have full shops, time shops here? Can we not do all these things, all these rights that we've won? I don't believe that's a problem. Winning rights is part and part of the struggle. That's how we manage those rights, which is the key issue. So if we win a right and we start to upgrade people, give them cards, phones, blah, 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 and make them into a bureaucracy, then we must pay the price. But if we win a right and we say a full-time shop steward no more than the average wage of the members, finish the club, then there's no incentive to create a labour aristocracy. My time's up. So, come on!